Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a discussion video, and today I want to talk with you about My Little Ponies. My Little Ponies are a pretty safe subject matter because no one is going to be offended or upset or triggered by My Little Ponies. Now, on the other hand, hold on a second. I've just got to move these out of the way. This is Canada. An American must have been here and left these firearms lying around. Just let me move those out of the way. Let's go ahead and make them safe first of all. Let's see, so we'll get that 1911 over here. Let's see here, M&P 9. This guy can come off to the side as well. And this hunting rifle. Now this hunting rifle is not too bad, but I'm sure it'll make the My Little Ponies nervous. So we should get it out of the way as well. And I'll just go ahead and open the action up on there. And you can see there's no magazine or anything. So we should be feeling pretty comfortable at this point. And let's go ahead and bring a couple of our My Little Ponies back on screen so that we can focus on the appropriate subject matter for the video, and so that no one from YouTube feels the need to demonetize this video, since My Little Ponies are definitely advertiser friendly. I want to talk a little bit about My Little Ponies, about people using, owning, storing, being licensed to have My Little Ponies in Canada. Okay, so first off, I want to point out that a lot of people around the world feel like Canada has no My Little Ponies in it. And as you can see, I've got a number of My Little Ponies on screen here. So there are certainly My Little Ponies in Canada. In fact, they weren't even that hard to find. Many people own My Little Ponies and use My Little Ponies for a bunch of different purposes. In fact, there are over 2 million licensed My Little Pony owners and users in Canada. And there are probably somewhere around 9 million My Little Ponies. Now I'm extrapolating a little bit based on a couple of things. Number one, in the last few years, the number of people who are interested in being licensed to own My Little Ponies is growing quite quickly, so that there's actually a real demand on those who are able to teach the courses required, as well the number of My Little Ponies being sold in Canada, back in 2013, 2012, 2013, since that time has been on a pretty steady increase. All right, so there actually are quite a few My Little Ponies in Canada, and they are classified into 3 different classes. Okay, so those classes are non-restricted. So that's, usually like a big, long, fairly safe looking My Little Pony. Okay, let's move these smaller My Little Ponies out of the way because they may fall into the restricted or prohibited category. But a long My Little Pony like this, let me just bring this firearm back in for 1 second. I don't want to make the My Little Pony nervous, but this would be called a long gun, by the way, and I'm just kind of mentioning that in passing since it happens to be on screen here. But a long gun like this in either a bolt action or semi-automatic, or lever action, or a number of other, the type that you would often use for maybe hunting or pigeon shoot or clay shooting or those kinds of things. Those are non-restricted. Okay, so a My Little Pony like this, no one is going to have a big issue with that. And they are what are considered non-restricted My Little Ponies. Now, there are another kind of My Little Pony that generally are a little smaller, and I'm oversimplifying this a little, but something like this little guy, maybe that would be too small, I don't know, but something like along these lines would probably be considered a restricted My Little Pony. And that's normally ones you can hold with one hand. They're semi-automatic and usually more used for sport shooting, things like that. I will say that those restricted My Little Ponies, I'll just, since we're talking about restricted, I'll just put this firearm quickly on the camera. This is an M&P 9 with a 4 1/4 inch barrel, and that would be an example of a firearm that's non-restricted, but we're not really talking about that. We're just talking about My Little Ponies, okay? So My Little Ponies, smaller ones, normally called handheld My Little Ponies, those are restricted in Canada, and you need a different license, and the rules surrounding their use and storage are a little bit different. And then there are what are called prohibited My Little Ponies, and I don't have an example of a prohibited weapon because, as the name implies, they are prohibited, and owning one could result in a prohibited weapons charge, which is not something you want to experience. So I will tell you that, you know, generally My Little Ponies that have very small horns, okay, that are under 4 inches are going to be considered prohibited. So those kind of things are going to be out of the question. Of course, My Little Ponies that have fully automatic functioning are going to be restricted as well. And that's a very basic breakdown of the classifications for My Little Ponies in Canada. Now, I will say this, guys, since we're talking about it, there are some My Little Ponies who are restricted by name. So it doesn't matter how they function, it doesn't matter how long the barrel is, it doesn't matter what they're made out of or what kind of food they eat. Those My Little Ponies are going to be restricted because of a particular name they have. Now, an equivalent example to that from the firearms world would be an M16 or an AR-15 or an AK-47 variant. Okay, those are all restricted, and some of them are even prohibited. In fact, I think all AK-47 variants are prohibited weapons. Okay, but anyway, that's besides the point. The main point is, yeah, there are some My Little Ponies you're not allowed to have in Canada, and that's kind of based on size and function, generally speaking, although there are some exceptions to that rule. Now, let's ask the question, what do people usually use their My Little Ponies for in Canada? Well, generally, people take them out into the woods and use them for finding and securing for the freezer other game animals. You know, maybe it's ducks or deer or moose or bears or whatever the case may be, whatever time of year it is and what season it is, and of course what you're interested in hunting. Those are going to be the most common use for My Little Ponies in Canada. Now, then there's also the sports aspect of My Little Ponies. So people who want to shoot competitively and go through a course where you're timed and trying to hit a number of targets as quickly as possible, or those who use 3 different kinds of My Little Ponies for various portions of a particular challenge. That's another common common use of firearms in Canada, and in growing in popularity very, very quickly. In fact, that area of My Little Pony ownership is growing quite quickly, so that it's actually a bit of a challenge in some cases to be able to find space in a course or get an instructor available to teach you the course that's needed in order to use those kinds of My Little Ponies in Canada. Now, let me let me add one little thing that I think is worth mentioning. Let's bring in another My Little Pony just for some variation here. We've got another guy with wings over here. Some parts of the world, like California, they don't like the My Little Ponies that have extra pieces like crowns or wings or certain accoutrements that may make the My Little Pony more attractive or more comfortable for shooting. Anyway, in Canada, we don't get too bent out of shape about that, so that's a fortunate thing. But I do want to point out that one of the things that is very low in Canada is the number of times that a My Little Pony is used to harm another individual. Very, very small number of My Little Pony deaths occur in Canada, like around 100. And usually it's under 100, but it varies a little bit from year to year. So that kind of gives you a little bit of introduction. Who owns My Little Ponies? What kind of things do they get used for? How many of them are there in the country? And of course, we've already introduced the idea that there is a license requirement. So let's ask the next question, which is, what does it take to own a My Little Pony in Canada? If I'm interested in either using my Little Pony for hunting purposes, or if I want to be involved in sports shooting, what kind of things should I be? Sorry, I kind of misspoke there with the shooting stuff. Just ignore that. So what kind of things should I be prepared to do? Well, you need to get a license. One of them is called a PAL, that is Possession and Acquisition License, which allows you, as the name implies, to possess or acquire My Little Ponies. Now, the other kind of license that's available is a restricted possession acquisition license, and that allows you to possess and acquire restricted My Little Ponies. And in order to get those licenses, what you have to do is take a course. There's a course associated with each one. So if you wanted to have your restricted possession acquisition license, you have to take the content from the non-restricted, or the PAL, the possession acquisition license, and then you would also have to take the restricted portion of that course as well. Then you have to pass a test, okay? And there are a number of people who are sort of authorized to offer those tests and to teach the material, and then those people, you know, send the test results off to the Ontario Firearms Office, or I mean the Ontario My Little Pony Control Board, and they approve or deny your request for a license to possess and acquire My Little Ponies. And they do that based on a number of things. So they check your references, they check your criminal background, they'll often call friends and family members and ask those friends and family members if they feel comfortable with you having My Little Ponies. And so there are a number of steps involved in getting yourself to a point where you can have those. Now, once you have a PAL, that is, once you've got a possession acquisition license, then you can go ahead and buy a non-restricted My Little Pony wherever you want, whenever you want. There's no record of that. There's no registry, nothing like that. On the other hand, for the restricted My Little Ponies, that is going to be a little more difficult. When you want to buy a restricted My Little Pony, there's going to be a transfer that takes place. So here's here's our example, if you recall, of a non-restricted My Little Pony. Let's get some of these out of the way. And something a little smaller, maybe like these two guys, would be a non-restricted My Little Pony. Okay, so let's go a little bit further with this and point out that restricted My Little Ponies, there is a registry. So the government wants to know where all of them are and who has them. And so if you want to own one, you have to put in for a transfer. And that is, you know, the transfer of the ownership of that gun is going to be taken from one name and put into another. And sometimes that's a pretty long process. And so if you go to a store today, let's say, and you find a restricted My Little Pony that you want to buy, you would buy it, you pay for it, and then they would send an application to the RCMP, in fact, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They'll go ahead and process that transfer, and sometimes it takes a while, like up to a month, and then eventually the transfer will go through and your restricted My Little Pony can go ahead and be placed into your possession. All right, so that's how that sort of thing plays out. Now that we've kind of covered how many My Little Ponies are in Canada, what they're used for, the different classifications of My Little Ponies, we've talked about what's required if you want to own My Little Ponies. By the way, I didn't say that there is also an additional hunting course in Canada, and I actually think, you know, the hunting course is quite good, and it kind of teaches you proper handling and respect for My Little Ponies and how to make sure that your My Little Pony is not going to hurt you or anyone else when you don't intend it to, you or anyone or anything else, I guess we should add. And then finally we talked about, you know, what it takes to own a My Little Pony, the licensing, the courses that you would have to take. Okay, so I think we pretty well covered everything. Oh, there is one thing that slipped my mind. If you want to own restricted My Little Ponies, you have to prove that you have a purpose or a place that you can use those that's legal, and they're only legal to be used at firing ranges. You cannot discharge a restricted My Little Pony like in your backyard or on your neighbor's farm or on your own farm, anything like that. It must be at a designated range for the use of My Little Ponies, and that's one other restriction that does exist for the restricted My Little Ponies. That's important to remember. So what should I do about this? Well, if you live in Canada and you're at all interested in My Little Ponies, and even if you're not that interested, I would recommend you first of all like this video, you subscribe to this channel, but then you take the course to get your possession and acquisition license, or even your restricted possession and acquisition license. The information presented in those courses is quite good, and you will learn, and even if you never end up owning a My Little Pony, it's still helpful to have that background, and even if you're put in a situation at some point in the future where you want to own a My Little Pony like that, you can at least do that. Now, as we kind of wrap things up, let's move the My Little Ponies out of the way and put the firearms here back where, you know, our American friend who likes firearms must have placed them. There we go. Obviously, this person was not a YouTuber because, you know, YouTubers don't, or YouTube itself is not a huge fan of firearms, but I'm pretty sure they're okay with My Little Ponies. So let's pop these back into the frame as we close things out. There we go. So I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, guys. I hope you've learned a little bit. I'd love to hear your comments below. Who of you own and use My Little Ponies yourselves? And the last thing I want to say is definitely take the time and energy to learn a little bit, to take that course, to become a licensed owner of My Little Ponies, and to join the CCFR, that is the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.